Great. Well, shall we get started? Today's webinar is really interesting. Continuous listening. Be careful what you wish for. So let's dive straight into this. I thought I'd start off with a description of continuous listening. Now, you might have seen this on one of our other webinars. Please take a chance to go and have a look at that. But I thought I'd recap. So continuous listening is all about complementing your annual engagement survey, typically, with real-time feedback. So all staff will get often a weekly email, and then a few clicks later, team members and team leaders will see one of these wonderful dashboards. And we ask simple questions like, how's your week been? You know, why are you glad that it's Friday? A snapshot of engagement, because that's the real leading indicator of productivity, absenteeism, and staff turnover, and then the all-important free text question about what would make the biggest difference, what suggestions or ideas do you have? So that's what continuous listening is. All staff get a weekly email, they respond, and then the team leader, everybody in the department gets to see the feedback immediately, and that's quite a big change. They will see this immediately, and we'll come on to the benefits or otherwise of that in a moment. Now, on the first webinar in this continuous listening series, I spoke a lot about the return on investment of continuous listening. I shan't go through that again now, but the simple fact is that if you start listening continuously, then you will pick up on worrying trends in sentiment and engagement as much as 6 months earlier than your annual engagement survey might otherwise do. So again, go and have a look at that other webinar just for me to go through some of that details. Right, patiently sitting next to me on this webinar, I thought it'd be great to really speak to somebody who's got a huge amount of operational experience, because this is all about getting going with continuous listening. So Karen, welcome. A little bit about yourself, please.
Thank you, Scott. Yes, delighted to be here. I've worked in employee engagement for over 20 years now, spanning the whole of the employee journey, working on the client side, working on the agency side, and now at Questback, where my role spans project management, a bit of consultancy, advice and guidance for clients too.
So when somebody enthusiastic like me comes along and says, don't waste another day, continuous listening, you've got to start next week, you're the person that will actually make that really happen. And tell me whether it is going to be next week or not.
Yes, I usually say, hold your horses, Scott.
Hold my horses. I hope that translates internationally. Let's see. So I thought what we might do is, I was thinking, this enthusiasm gets me into all sorts of problems. So I wrote down, I think, 4 or 5 different problems that occurred to me in launching a continuous listening program, and it would be great to get your thoughtful comments on this. I think the first one that I hear quite often is, okay, so we're going to be sending out weekly emails. It's an automated system. It happens in the background. How will employees react? If suddenly they get a surprise email, they're not quite sure who it's from. It's got nice smiley faces in there. Is it spam? Is it for real? It's been sent to me as an email. If I click on it, will the system, know this, that my response has come from me? Am I going to get 50 of these a week? Is it just the annual survey done on a weekly basis? And will anything happen really? So it is very enthusiastic. But before you get going, what should you do really?
Those are all great questions, Scott, and one certainly that we come across regularly with our clients and their employee workforces. I think above all, communicate through the whole process. So you tell your employees what you're going to do, then you tell them as you're doing it, and you communicate through that whole process. You remind them that it's there and that there's an opportunity for them to feedback. You tell them when you've done it, and then you tell them what you're doing with the findings and how you're following those up with progress reports as necessary.
Do you actually tell them to respond? Is it, are you looking for 100% response rates every week from everybody?
Ideally, you won't have to tell them to respond, right, because they will know instinctively to do so. And in organisations where this works at its best, employees are engaged with the concept of feedback and want to provide it. And it's not just the yay sayers or the naysayers, it's the whole of the workforce. In other organisations, people take a bit of time to get used to the concept, and particularly when they've only been asked for their views previously, perhaps once a year or once every 2 years in some unfortunate cases.
Really?
So it does take time to embed itself into the culture. But if they can see it working, then their faith in that process will be enforced.
And what happens if it goes the other way, and groups of people start to run a campaign? We want more cakes in the canteen, or they start ganging up a little bit on a specific manager. And is continuous listening for the place for this?
It's a place for all feedback. And remember that all feedback is important, and sometimes it's not just what they say, but what they're saying, what the comments are about, the themes behind their comments, which can be feeling valued, feeling recognised. It could be feeling well led or not well led. So there are lots of different variations on that theme. Sometimes you will get a minority of vocal individuals, but it's like any employee research, and what you need to do is to show that you're listening. Right.
Okay. So make sure that people are expecting it. I mean, testing it out and seeing if it's a nice surprise is probably not the best way to go. The second thing, I mentioned this earlier. As soon as enough people have responded, because we're trying to make sure that the responses are anonymous to start with, everybody gets to see the dashboard. So I hear this as well. Yikes, my team's seeing my results at the same time as I am. That's not very traditional. Often a survey is done, senior management look at the results, and then they pass it down to middle management, pass it down to team leaders, pass it down to staff. This isn't like that. This is instant. It is anonymous, as I've said, and we are encouraging companies to be even more open, and not just share in their team meetings, but maybe even in their common workplaces, common workspaces, the canteen, staff common rooms, to actually display those dashboards. Why not? And again, so is that a problem? Should we be concerned that everybody's going to see the results immediately?
There's certainly nothing wrong with transparency, Scott. In organisations generally, I think that there's been an unfortunate history of the results taking time to cascade down through the ranks, communications being one way downward. I think the opportunity is very refreshing to have open, transparent feedback whereby everyone has sight of the kind of sentiments that are being expressed and the sort of themes that are important to employees. So this can really be a good thing.
Right, and I think it's also important to involve all employees. I mean, I mentioned a weekly email. I suppose the question is, does it have to be a weekly email, and are we thinking just of office-based staff here?
Well, there are different ways of reaching your workforce, and typically if everyone's office-based, then it's quite simple. If you've got people who are working on shifts, who only come in once a week or once every 2 weeks, or they're on revolving patterns and might otherwise miss things, if they're digging holes in the road, if they're out in fields, factories,
or the guy in that crane there that we can see out the window.
The guy in the crane out of the window. It's quite hard to reach people relatively. So what we advise organisations to do is to use a range of communication channels in order to reach out to them, and that may include online, but not exclusively so.
Right, so good old-fashioned posters on the back of toilet doors even.
Yes, and line managers play a very important part in team meetings and team-based communications. A lot of organisations for people out on the road have audio-based mechanisms for communicating. Okay. So there are lots of different options available, and we can certainly advise on that.
Okay. Fantastic. Problem number 3. Gosh, too many comments, ideas, and suggestions. I did have this. I was speaking with a company a couple of months ago. I think I've mentioned this before on one of these webinars as well. They said, "Hey, wow, what happens if I get 11,000 comments? One from every employee in the business." That's probably an extreme case, but what happens if you do get 500 comments in week 1? Is that something that you want or something that you don't want?
We encourage feedback. Yeah. And volume is rarely a problem. I think you need to have processes in place to deal with any volumes. and that may include self-theming of comments. It may include text analytics, so that you can then start to sort of quantify the themes that people are using to express their concerns or suggestions, and then obviously you've got to read the detail and try to absorb what it is that people are saying.
So what is it? What are we expecting here? I mean, is it completely tell us what you think, or should we be actually asking questions about how's the change program going, or do you like the new leadership model, or how open should the free text question be really?
I think usually focused. It's never a vote for a pay rise tomorrow, because realistically that's not going to happen. However, if you ask open free text comments in a constructive way, you'll get people's honest views and you'll get their suggestions for improvement, so that they're kind of doing your work for you, really. It's just a question of sorting through them, making priorities, and using the processes that you would use in any form of action planning.
So again, I mean, you mentioned text analytics as well. If you get I don't know, I mean, maybe it's just the way that my brain is wired, but when I get a whole load of free text comments, I very quickly like to look through and spot my own trends and common issues and concerns. Now, not everybody is sort of wired the same way, but is that something you'd recommend? What's the limit on that? Is it 500, or is it 1,000, or is it 10, or what is it?
In terms of the volumes that you would expect?
Yeah, any one person. Who should be looking at the comments? Let's start with that. Who should be looking at these comments?
Okay, so everyone, in theory, should be looking at the comments. In terms of people with responsibility for taking action, perhaps they are the priority in the first instance, so they have a chance to read and to digest. But in the interest of openness and transparency, then everyone should have the opportunity.
And again, I suppose one of the great things about this is you should be asking for, give us your suggestions, give us your innovations, give us your ways in which we can improve things. So there are some some really important business critical kind of things coming out in the comments. I mean, are those the kind of things that we should be expecting, looking for, encouraging as well?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the more comments and helpful suggestions employees are able to make, and they see them taken forward where it's possible to do so, and there is in any case an issue around managing expectations. So if everyone should say that they want a pay rise tomorrow, clearly that's not possible, and you need to be able to tell them that's the case and why that's not possible. But focusing in on what you can do, focusing on ideally quick, easy wins in the first instance, and then using the rest of the themes to inform probably what business strategy or HR strategy already exists. So just feeding those in. So it's just another strand in that process.
But again, I was thinking about this a little bit. If we have a nice open environment, we get lots of comments, we get lots of suggestions. Isn't there a danger that one week we head off in one direction, the next week we head off in a different direction, and then another one, and we sort of take lots of micro actions because we're kind of getting, sometimes we call it snackable feedback or micro feedback or whatever it is. So is that a danger that we become very reactive rather than sort of proactive?
No, I don't think so. I think you need to take the sort of longer view in all of this. You clearly can't adopt a scattergun approach to the feedback, but take on board the kind of themes where the greatest volumes of comments are attributed, and resisting the urge to think about who said what and focusing in on what it is they're actually saying and suggesting. So I don't see a concern there.
Right, it just makes me nervous a little bit because, as a team leader, I might get a whole bunch of feedback one week and think, oh my gosh, I need to improve in this area, or there's an opportunity to do that. And then the following week, maybe I just did something about it and it all changed, and that's fine because then I can see what I did made a difference. But but maybe the following week something happens and everybody starts talking about something else, and I have to react to that, and then the following week react to something else. So,
that's rarely the case, and we tend not to see huge shifts over a period of time, but more consistent themes emerging that you could focus on and stay with for the duration of your actions.
Okay.
Not to say that you shouldn't adapt,
right?
But probably not as often as you're concerned that you might have to.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we talk about continuous listening. It's almost like we need a sort of continuous action model as well. That's the right sort of size and shape for this. Because some things I can do, you know, so if I get feedback, I can make changes. If it's a team or departmental wide, then of course that will take a little bit longer. We need to collaborate and understand what we need to do. So some things I can't be as instantly reactive. You know, just because of the organisation and the size of the actions, it'll just take a little bit longer to for those to play out, I suppose. What about the opposite though? You know, people seem nervous of making comments. So, you know, they're kind of, yeah, my sentiment's going down, I'm not very happy, my engagement's lagging behind that, and, you know, but those are both indicators of people being less productive, they're indicators of people potentially being absent or not wanting to even stay with the business. And that's kind of the sort of the most negative, really, isn't it? People are nervous about making comments because I'm in an environment where there's a lot of negativity. So why should I contribute even into that? What would you say people should be thinking as individuals in that sort of circumstances?
I think that there will always be a proportion of people, hopefully a minority, that might be nervous about giving their views and being open and honest. And a lot of that goes back to the culture that's fostered within an organisation. Right. With continuous listening, because it's a relatively frequent mechanism, people should very quickly be able to see over the course of time feedback on the comments that have been made, on the themes that are concerning people and the suggestions that they make to improve things. And so it should become apparent fairly quickly that what they say is of value is being listened to and being acted upon. And that right. should help to encourage them and to allay any fears or concerns that they may have.
Yeah, this is an interesting balance, because often, as you mentioned earlier, we would do continuous listening through a period of change. There's some kind of change management program going on, a merger and acquisition, a reorganization, digitalization, and so people do get nervous. But really, what we're trying to encourage are comments to make that whole process better for everybody. I think that makes a lot of sense. What about if, again, lurching back in the other direction, we get a whole bunch of inappropriate comments, gosh, inappropriate language, and that varies within companies. It varies in cultures as well. Sometimes people, maybe ganged up to make a point, so they kind of get together. You've mentioned the pay rise. It could be, people make a lot of inappropriate comments about a manager, for example. So how do we sort of balance this openness with any form of screening? Does HR have a role to play in screening those sorts of comments before they get to the individuals? Does that make any sense to do at all?
I think that there is often a case for it, and again, I would stress that these tend to be in the minority in our experience. Occasionally there's screening that is necessary for profanity, for example, for naming individuals who would be embarrassed if they were to have their name sort of up in lights for all the wrong reasons. So I think case by case,
because some of these could end up in the canteen, couldn't they, in the common workplace, if you've got these kind of comments?
Yeah, I think that there is a case for some screening. I think you just have to see how it goes, and you very quickly get a sense of how much attention you're going to have to give this sort of thing. Generally, it's not that much. Right. It's more of a sense check. Right. So it shouldn't be a barrier to people. Any feedback, as I say, is welcome. If people if people are silly enough to not take the opportunity to communicate in a professional and constructive manner, then to some extent they've lost out on the opportunity. Yeah. But I think that there is a case for just having a little safety net in place, but it shouldn't be a huge concern.
I think that's a key point. You can spend all of your time looking at the one or two people with all of their negative comments, and it's important that people have a voice. This doesn't have to be the one, but the other 98 who are saying positive things, giving constructive ideas, are you shouldn't stop them because of the onesies or the twosies. Something else, I saw an article on the BBC website recently, and it talked about the use of technology to screen role profile. So when a company's advertising a role, and that's being used to take out certain words which cause a bias in terms of applicants. So if you use strong words like manage, then you tend to get more male applicants and fewer female, etc. And that's had some very positive effects for diversity. The one criticism of it, interestingly, which I've just remembered, is that by taking out a lot of this sort of colourful language or unconscious bias language, all of the role profiles were ending up about the same, and there was no way for companies to really put their sort of character into them. So everything was becoming vanilla flavored. I mean, again, couldn't that happen to this if you're chopping out all of the, I mean, profanities aside, chopping out inappropriate language, all of a sudden you end up with all the comments that sort of look and feel about the same.
No, I think if there's any editing process in place, it's very straightforward and usually involves replacing a word with some X's, perhaps.
Right. Okay.
But nothing more than that. So
right,
rest assured,
yeah.
It's certainly not to vanillarize the feedback or to change what people have said.
I think you've got to you've got to try this and see what happens. And you could use text analytics actually to take these things out. I mean, we've all got phones, and if you type in a few letters, it replaces them with lots of others, etc. So that's all possible and available. But I think you're right. Have a look, see what happens. Keep reinforce. We keep talking about communicate. Reinforce the benefits of two-way dialogue. I think the last problem from me, we're all enthusiastic in week one, but participation drops off after a few weeks. Now, interestingly, we do see this sometimes, but many times we don't. The participation actually increases, oddly enough. But what about if a concern is we launch it in week one, we got 500 responses or comments or whatever, and then that starts to tail off, often because nothing seems to be being done with the feedback, or I made some suggestions and nobody came back and asked me. I mean, I'm making this anonymously, so why would I expect anybody to get back to me about what I've already put in?
Well, they would rarely get back to you as an individual,
right.
Scott. It's more confidential than anonymous, and so they wouldn't be able to attribute your comment
right.
directly to you unless you had a particularly unique turn of phrase.
Or I put my name in my
or you
comment,
signed your comment with your name.
Is that recommended, by the way, putting my name into my comments?
No.
Okay.
But in the interest of confidential survey, definitely not.
Well, I guess I'd be fine with it, but I suppose other people on the team, if we all do it, and then one of the guys on the team has a bit of a gripe, and he's the only person or she's the only person that doesn't put the name in it, it's quite easy to work out. So I guess that's just a bit of a bad practice anyway, isn't it?
Yes, it's not something that we solicit or encourage.
Okay.
In terms of acting on suggestions, I think people need to be thanked for their participation,
right.
Encouraged to participate regularly, for more people to come on board and give their views, and for people to have some sense of what's happening to all this feedback, what's being done with it, when will they hear anything, how it's being used to inform action plans, and once in a while there'll be some real nuggets in the suggestions that can be shared, so that people then realise that what they've said is being listened to, is being acted upon, and is of value. And I think that's what drives people to participate in that sort of thing, knowing that what you say is being valued.
Yeah, and something that I keep reinforcing is, this system, this automation, we all find it easier to complain, if you like, make suggestions to a computer. It feels a little bit less personal, and people are more open, especially if it's anonymous. But what I say is this should be used to drive more human interaction, not take away from or replace human interaction. So, share the feedback in your team meetings openly. Hey guys, this is how you scored me, and it is scored. I can see how the trend's been going, and what did I say during this week that caused your sentiment to drop, because I need to know, so that we can, we'll collaborate. But also, if I've got an issue with that, maybe there are other teams in the business that have issues, and I should be speaking with those managers, those teams, to say, hey, is this a common problem? Can we collaborate and move this forward together? Or actually, maybe the problem's coming out of how, sales and marketing work together. So it should drive collaboration, not take away from it.
Yes, absolutely. And by sharing information, sharing achievements, and sharing best practices, between teams, and often you'll find that strong teams get buddied with weaker teams so that they can collaborate, cross-fertilise, and learn from each other's experiences. So that's a very good thing that comes out of this kind of research.
Yeah, so take action. That's the key thing, I think. But also tell people, as you've mentioned this a lot of times, but we all want a big pay rise. It's important not just to ignore that, but to go back with a sensible response. We have the annual pay round, and we'll talk to each about what that will be and when, because people will ask for perfectly reasonable and perfectly unreasonable things. I'm absolutely sure. So going back on all of those is really, really important. And then measure the impact of those actions. I think that's really important as well. And what I've seen a lot is, if you do this, if you set yourself up for success, you listen carefully, you take actions, and you feed back what's happened with all of those suggestions, then people will give you more and more feedback. And I often think that feedback, I suppose, traditionally has been felt as though it's communications, let's say, is something that the leadership does to the business. The leadership broadcasts, communicates to the business. Here's what's going to happen. For me, this flips it around. This is the workforce broadcasting to the leadership. Really, here's what we want. You listen to us. Kind of flips things around a little bit. So, in summary, nice and simple. Maybe I'll let you take us through this. You're the practical one of the two of us.
Okay, so first of all, get going. Don't pontificate about it.
Is that next week? Delay. Go next week or next month?
You can get going next week, Scott.
Thank you.
The rest of us can catch up with you. Right. So to have a plan in place, some sort of time frame to work to, and then tell people what you're doing and commit to those time frames. Tell them what you're doing, tell them when you're doing it, tell them as you do it, when you've done it, and then all the way through the taking action and updating on progress. So very important there. Be prepared to share, warts and all, as Scott said. Not all feedback is positive, and we would advise clients to resist the urge to try and sanitize anything, as you would with any employee survey. So the fact that it's more frequent is a benefit to you, and just means that you have your finger on the pulse in a more timely manner than you would otherwise do. Keep an eye on the comments, particularly the themes around what people are saying. But in terms of the micro level, the nitty-gritty suggestions can often be real nuggets of value coming out of this. Very specific suggestions about what people want to see, ideas. So really handing you your actions on a plate if you choose to accept the mission. And then finally, taking action. There are so many research pieces that get done among employees where people get listened to, but then nothing happens. And action plans are formulated with the very best of intentions, but they're not followed through, and people are not held accountable and responsible. So I think from a best practice point of view, if you're going to build value in this process, you need to be seen to be taking action where appropriate, and where you can't, then say so, and then keep people informed about the progress of those actions and what's been achieved and what's still ongoing.
Yeah, and then I think you go back to number one and keep going, and then over communicate, and then keep sharing, and so on and so forth. Fantastic. Well, thanks very much for all of your really sensible steps and thoughts on this, Karen. I just wanted to share this dashboard with everybody. This is, again, it's a reminder of what everybody will see once they've completed a weekly beat. Which is really just 3 or 4 clicks usually once a week, and they can choose to take it to answer or not. And this is the kind of information that pops up. So how was last week? It was okay, it was bad, it was great, and then you can see how that's sort of trending over time, and you might want to look at why you know, in one particular week, sentiment is dropping. You know, what caused that? What caused that drop there from 80 to 70 in terms of your sentiment score, for example? And you can have a look in this area here, this heat map, as to you know, what's driving things up and what's dragging things down. So, you know, one person here had a really bad week because of their team, for example. And then you can drill down a little bit more into some of the detail, the free text comments. Now, in terms of who sees what, just to reinforce, everything that's submitted is anonymous. The first port of call is for the team to see the feedback that they've provided with the team manager, and that's usually the scope of things. But you can also roll up teams into departments, or you can have a look at all the sales guys, all of marketing, etc. So you can dice and slice the information, because this is a real-time dashboard, and you can get some help with things like text analytics if you so choose to sort of theme your open comments, etc. So we are just about at time. I wonder if we've got a few questions popping up. Yeah, it looks like we've had a couple coming in. So just very quickly, just got a couple of minutes. First one is, how do I get senior management buy-in? So if I'm in HR, I want to do continuous listening, I need to go and talk to senior management, because this is quite a big change. So what's the best way of getting senior management buy-in?
I think there are forums. Usually HR communications professionals have an ongoing dialogue with the CEO and the senior management team. So it's a question of just building the business case in the same way that you would for any employee research. And the big benefit, of course, is that they're getting feedback more frequently. They're getting an opportunity to influence engagement, which potentially saves the business money. The organisation can save money on employee recruitment, employee retention, productivity, all of those things, you know, most likely to grab the attention of senior management. And if you have your finger on the pulse more frequently than you would otherwise have, then that's got to be an all-round win.
Right. Okay. And I know you've got to run and get a train, actually. So please do send in your other questions. The one thing that we will send you after the webinar as well is a link to a little self-diagnosis tool, really, that just in a kind of fun and engaging way, I'd like to think, will let you, in a few questions, just understand, are you ready for continuous listening? And there's some really nice, helpful hints and suggestions in there. So take a look at that, give it a try, let me know what you think. Many thanks to Karen for all of your, as I say, sage advice throughout this webinar. And thanks everybody for taking part. I hope you enjoyed that, and more to the point, I hope you learned something useful from it. Again, please do reach out to me, have a look on the Questback website. My name's Scott Hayhoe, and thanks again for watching and listening.